States most impacted by that industry. And joining us now is Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher, serving Wisconsin's 8th District. As always, do want to start off and say appreciate your service, Congressman. We do want to get your impression as well of the debate.
Well, it was a very acrimonious debate. It was, I think, fair to say, less a debate on deep policy issues and more just an all-out verbal brawl. So I hope future debates will go more down the path of substantive conversations about policy. I do think there are hard questions that need to be asked, particularly about Vice President Biden, who, let's face it, has not faced aggressive questioning from the media, particularly on his plans to pack the Supreme Court. I know Chris Wallace asked that question. I thought it was unfortunate that Biden didn't actually have to answer it. I think there's a meaningful disagreement between both candidates on the issue of law and order, how we can support our police. I put myself in the camp of wanting to support the police, not defund the police. I'm glad President Trump emphasized that. But we'll see. It was an acrimonious debate. I'm not sure it changed anybody's minds. It probably forced a lot of people to change the channel. But we have important policy disagreements in this country we need to litigate at some point.
Yeah, there were those of us who could not change the channel as we were continuing to cover it. But as it relates to manufacturing, what were your thoughts when you heard the president and Joe Biden talk about manufacturing jobs? Have you seen anything to support their claims in Wisconsin?
Well, certainly prior to the pandemic, the manufacturing sector was booming, at least in my neck of the woods in Northeast Wisconsin. In fact, the limiting factor to further growth was a human factor. If you talk to any manufacturing company in Northeast Wisconsin, they tell you right now, again, in fact, that we would be building a new facility, we'd be doing more, but we just can't find enough workers. We can't find younger kids that are willing to show up to work, that can pass a drug test, that have the basic schools. That's really our paramount economic challenge, not only in Wisconsin, but in America. I do think when it comes to the issue of China, the president has a natural advantage over his rival, Vice President Biden, who supported China's accession to the WTO in 2001, which was the most damaging thing for American manufacturing in its entire history. And we've hollowed out various industries. And I think what the pandemic has shown us quite painfully is that our supply chains are very weak. They're brittle. And in many cases, they lead all the way back to Beijing. And I know that the White House is committed to bringing back a lot of that domestic manufacturing, whether it's in advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, rare earth processing, semiconductor manufacturing, things like that. That's going to be the biggest lesson learned of the pandemic. We have to have some form of selective economic decoupling from China. And my hope is that that's not a partisan issue. I think that's something that Democrats and Republicans should be united on.
And Foxconn was one of those cases where we were going to be watching some of the hardware production coming back from overseas. Have you seen any evidence to say that Foxconn right now is up and running in the state?
Well, certainly ground has been broken and facilities are being built. There's been some change of what exactly they're planning to do at that facility, how many people they're planning to hire. The Republican-controlled legislature would tell you they structured the deal such that Foxconn doesn't get any of the benefits unless they deliver on the jobs. Let's hope that turns out to be true. I tend to think that the best strategy for economic development, particularly for a state like Wisconsin, is not to spend a lot of time and money luring foreign companies into our state, but rather to build off our indigenous domestic companies that already exist, that already know the communities, and figure out how we can do things like allow Wisconsin manufacturing companies to invest in K through 12 education systems so they can start getting in the classroom early and produce the workforce they need right there. And I think if we do enough of that, we can create an environment that's naturally attractive to companies like Foxconn or whoever else wants to flee bad state governance in states like Illinois or New York or California.
Just one more question on international relations quickly here. You're part of the China Task Force, which came out with 400 recommendations, including one calling for Congress to pass a bill that you introduced. It would freeze foreign 5G companies engaging in economic or industrial espionage from the U.S. banking system. Why do you see this as a top priority, and help us break this down?
Well, a lot's changed in our economy since the good old days of, traditional American manufacturing. Even your manufacturers are online, right? And the internet is a crucial part of our economy. It's a crucial part of our daily life. And advances in internet technology, particularly 5G technology, are going to be critical to not only our economic health, but how we live our daily lives. And the simple fact is we can't allow companies like Huawei, which are effectively appendages of the Chinese Communist Party, to dominate the future of the internet. We now know without a shadow of a doubt they're going to use that to not only spy on everybody across the globe, but to shut down American companies to dominate the global market, which will give them more leverage over our daily lives. We can't allow that to happen, so we need to take a step like this. And the good news about this legislation is that it's not just Republicans like me or hawkish Republicans like Tom Cotton advocating for it, but we got Democrats on board. We have Chuck Schumer as a co-sponsor of this bill in the Senate, and that should tell you something about China policy right now. I think we have an opportunity to kind of build a bipartisan foundation for the future of U.S. foreign policy around the shared goal of not only competing with, but beating the Chinese Communist Party in this great power competition.
Just lastly, while we have you, we do know that over the summer we've had social unrest in your state, in Wisconsin. And one huge thing was this topic on the debate stage last night. And so as you think about what you heard from both candidates, does one of them or another, does anything that you heard last night actually signal that one would quell concerns more than another candidate coming into this election and even post-election, whoever is in the Oval Office?
Well, I do hope those concerns can be quelled regardless of what happens in November, because I think Wisconsinites of both political parties, they don't want their businesses burned to the ground. They don't want cops to have bricks thrown at their heads. It's just not who we are as a state. I thought it was unfortunate that Vice President Biden did not and has not condemned anarchic groups like Antifa, which have fomented a lot of this chaos and destruction. And I do think there are dangers to further demonization and defunding of the police, particularly in cities like Kenosha, at least in my neck of the woods, which is a bit north of Kenosha and northeast Wisconsin. We have good relationships between law enforcement and the local community. Our cops are not all evil racists that wake up every day trying to hurt people because of the color of their skin. They want to keep the community safe, and we got to keep those relationships healthy. Congressman,
we got to go. I would love to continue this conversation. Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin joining us here today. Thanks so much for the time. Guys, that's it for Closing Bell. Coming up on the news wrap, we're sitting down with former basketball star Charles Oakley to talk about his latest moves on the dance